Welcome to another episode of the Doctor's Podcast with Rabea Akram. This is Rabea Akram. I'm a medical doctor, an entrepreneur, an expert in brain health. And in this podcast, I interview other medical doctors, worldwide leading experts in health and performance enhancement. And I bring you their stories of overcoming personal challenges, their formula for success, and their knowledge in their respective fields of expertise. And today I have a very special guest here with me. His name is Dr. Ahmad Nazzal. Ahmad is a medical doctor with clinical experience in many areas such as neurology, neuroradiology, general diagnostics radiology, and general medicine. He has also a Ph.D. in neurosciences from the Max-Planck Institute of Neurosciences in Goettingen in Germany. And Ahmad is interested in many different research areas such as the neuronal correlates of decision making and how artificial intelligence is affecting patient-oriented healthcare. So without further ado, Ahmad, welcome to the podcast.
Great, thank you for having me, Rabea. I'm very excited to be here.
There are so many different things that we can cover in today's interview, and one of the things that you have done extensive research on is how the biology side aspect falls into decision making. And I'm very interested to know what made you take that path, what made you come from, being a clinical physician, a medical doctor, into doing a research, doing a PhD in neurosciences and study decision making.
Right.
Maybe you could give me a little bit background on your passion and where the path that led you to that.
Sure. So as you said, decision making is basically, it touches every aspect in our life. So, and it is very critical for us to understand how do we formulate decisions in general. For me personally, I was interested in consciousness, the human experience, how this consciousness arises, what is consciousness, and if we are able to localize a region in the brain that is responsible or involved in consciousness, in this consciousness experience. So that was what motivated me to get into the research of decision making specifically, and using functional technique like magnetic resonance imaging, which allows us to look at the brain without non-invasively, without opening the skull. So decision making was, for me, a way to kind of understand this is a very close area to us. As a human being, we regularly form decisions. So if we can finally understand how does this happen, what is the mechanism behind decision making, maybe we could, that was the logic, maybe we could shed some light on consciousness or the conscious experience. So from a neuroscientific point of view, the conscious experience is this qualia, we call it, like a quanta in physics, like the chunks of reality in physics, but the qualia is the experience, basically, the chunks of the experience that we have. So right now I'm experiencing talking to you, and then, so the idea was, could we understand decision making in terms of that will lead us to the qualia or decision making or consciousness. Yeah. So I used functional magnetic resonance imaging, and that was done in the Max Planck Institute in Goettingen, which has a very good infrastructure for research in general. Fmri was even some of the very important, flare sequence was developed by Professor Fram, for example, in Goettingen, and he was one of the pioneers for this technology. So I was lucky to be at this hub and to pursue research on this very critical aspect. I guess you did your work there, right? You also worked in Goettingen, but we didn't have. We never met, although it was small.
Funny, because I just only recently learned that where you did your PhD was right across the street from where I studied medicine, so the hospital in Goettingen. and the Max Planck Institute. But funny that we never knew each other back then. Yeah.
Right. So in terms of like decision making, what I focused on was perceptual decision making. So
Yeah.
like if you perceive something, if you like see something, would you, for example, go left or right, or
Yeah.
what is the decision that you would take? And that was because it's a well-researched region or like area of the neuroscience. So it started with like a paradigm called the random dot motion, where like subjects needs to fixate on a dot, and then like a group of arrows move to one direction or the other, and the subject in a different coherency rates, and the subject would have to press right or left, for example, if most of the like arrows move in the right direction, like. And the interesting thing, like when this, so you can train monkeys to perform this task. It's as easy that you can even train monkeys to do it.
Yeah.
And with monkeys, it is possible that you can do invasive research. So interestingly, like if the monkey would, and so the paradigm, you can change the different difficulties, like different coherence levels. So if you have so many arrows moving to the right, then it is easy. But if you have like let's say 70% or like 30%, it's still easy. But if you have like 55 and 50%, like 55 of the arrows moving to the right, 50 moving to the left, it gets harder. So the interesting thing that if you record like the neuroactivity in the monkeys, like from a specific region called lateral bank of interparietal cortex, it's a region in the parietal region, like parietal cortex, which is a bit posterior but superior in the brain. You could see the neurons firing in a correlation with what the choice of the monkey. Like I'm trying to simplify as much as possible because it really there is a huge debate on what you're really recording there. Is it? So you could record from the like the occipital cortex, which is the visual cortex of the monkey, and you could like see a tuning of the neurons to the like characteristics of the stimuli. So like it has. So that's the argument, that it does not have much to do with the decision itself. But in the interparietal cortex, what you see, the neuronal firing there shows a modulation by the difficulty of the task. So if the task gets harder, it's still like you see a higher firing rate.
Yeah.
Like when the task gets harder, when the decision making gets harder,
It's harder.
for a specific decision, right or left, for example, from a specific population of neurons.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to understand was, okay, is there like a region in the brain that is involved in decision making regardless of visual or auditory? You know, like I was motivated by finding the consciousness, and this is a unified experience. So I wanted to kind of understand, okay, is like the visual decisions, is there like a region in the brain that is like the general decision maker kind of? So what we did was we used fMRI. And fMRI is great. It is not invasive. You can record what's happening with the brain while the subject is doing the task inside the scanner. But the issue of fMRI is that it is sluggish. Sluggish is terms like temporally slow, and even like spatially. So like you're saying in what you're doing in the fMRI, you look at voxels, and the voxel contains like, let's say like 1 millimeter voxel, but there's like so many neuronal activity happening there. And temporally, like once you're recording really with the electrophysiological studies in monkeys, you can see the temporal differences on a stimuli per stimuli. Like even if the stimuli is like milliseconds difference, you can see what's happening in the neurons that you miss with function magnetic resonance with the fMRI. So that was a problem because you have the electrophysiological studies, and then we come in and say, okay, we have this activity and we predict that the activity would look like this in the fMRI field. However, there's an issue with the fMRI that what we're recording, we really don't understand. And that was a big, big issue in the 2016. There was a publication talking about like that we do the statistical, like what you see at the end of the image is a statistical map. Basically, you're saying, okay, at this cutoff point, is there like an activity that is that statistically significantly higher than the other boxes in the brain for that correlation? So you correlate your signal with stimuli that you presented, like with the characteristics of the stimuli, for example, the difficulty that we're interested in.
Right.
And then what happens is you're not recording the neuronal activity itself, but you're recording the oxygen coupling, the metabolic activity reflected or correlating with what was happening in the neuronal level. But that's tricky because you don't know what is the activity is related to. Is it related to like the activity itself, or is it related to like cleaning what's happening afterwards? In simple terms, saying like what happening afterwards of the like excitation of or the neuronal firing. So are we recording the astrocytes? For example, you have so many cells in the brain. So you have the neurons, but the majority is glial cells, which are like supportive tissue to the neurons. Is what we're looking at simply not related to the FM, like the neuronal activity, and it gets tricky once you're probing into like the higher cognitive skills. So, and that is why so many psychology reports or studies are being criticized as you cannot replicate, basically, the replication crisis in psychology and in fMRI. So that was that we faced that.
Yeah, that's the challenge, right?
It's a very challenging issue. So the predictions was, if you have a neuron firing, like let's say LIP, this is like in the monkey region, that is modulated by the task difficulty, then you come with an fMRI technique with a sluggish, and you have the hemodynamic response. So what is the expectation here? Is it if it's firing like for harder tasks, do you expect then that the fMRI signal to be higher for more difficult trials, or for simpler, easy trials?
Right.
And that would affect your whole results. So yeah, that was a big issue in my study. Like, okay, if you look at this assumption that there was higher trials, like the prediction that the trials that harder would lead to a higher fMRI signal, that the higher they're easier, and then that the decision making correlates are in those regions that shows this difference, this in difficult, modulated by the task difficulty. So what we found was that areas in the frontal regions and parietal regions are generally active regardless of the decision. So if you're trying, for example, my task was like receive like auditory clicks to the right, auditory clicks to the left, and said, was there more on the right or the left? Or like flashes to the right eye, flash to the left, or the left screen presented to the left screen or the right screen, and you have to say, was there more to the right or more to the left? So if we take this assumption that the signal of fMRI is higher for harder or more difficult trials than easier, that is related to the decision making, that like modulation is the difficulty for the harder trials, then we will have regions in the brain that are, regardless of the sensory modality, that are active for forming decisions. The issue is then you have other things in the brain happening, like attention. Okay, so maybe it was because it is harder, you needed more attention resources
Right.
to kind of focus on the stimuli to kind of make it your decision.
Yeah. So Ahmed, can I just stop you right there? Just everything that you said translated to English. So that would mean like we have this basic level of activity in the parietal and the frontal regions, regardless of how hard that decision is. So can I say that?
I think you could say that we have the frontal parietal region activity regardless of the sensory modality
Okay.
you're testing.
Right.
This activity is related to forming the decision regardless of if the decision was for visual decision or auditory decision.
Right.
If we take the assumption that the fMRI signal is higher for more or harder tasks.
Right. Okay. So that's still a question that's not 100% solved, right? So, right.
Yeah, it's still debatable, and
Right.
we need more studies to address this issue, like of fMRI, to understand. I think this is a very critical thing to kind of address. Right. Yeah. So that's pretty much it regarding the disease, like I don't know, like the consciousness question, or like decision, the interesting decision making.
So I understand that you have, all these things that are not 100% certain, right? If the level of activity in decision making, if that's correlating with the level of activity that you see in the fMRI, because fMRI is, you also see the level of metabolism in the fMRI, right? So that could come from anything else. Not the stimulus itself, but something else. So I understanding those limitations of these studies. What is your view? Knowing everything that we know now in neuroscience, what is your view of this question that you have been trying to answer using your research about decision making? Like, could you explain us in your own terms?
So my view, it is harder than what I expected when I first started my research. So I think we need more collaborative approach to kind of understand what is really going on, at least in not only for consciousness. So like consciousness is a very far-fetched goal. I think we should focus on things we understand first, like questions that we could formulate and then answer those questions. And that's why I like the decision-making field, because it's a very collaborative field between mathematicians, physicians, physicists, neuroscientists. So like you could go back with the history of my research to like Alan Turing and the first evidence of like studying accumulative decision making, like studying how machines could categorize if this product is valid, if this product is not valid. Like you can track it back to those first equations, and then to like modelers and purely mathematicians that are working on decision-making models, like the drift diffusion model. Then you throw in like the fMRI and the technology from the physicist world, and then you bring us like someone who studied medicine, who's interested in the biology of the human brain. But I think without this collaborative effort, it's very hard to understand any of the questions we're trying to address. And it's a very not narrow, but specific question, but could impact fields like AI, artificial intelligence. That's where my interest in artificial intelligence started, because I was trying to analyze my data using like support vector machines, which is like a specific algorithm for used in machine learning. to kind of categorize, like predict which voxels are related to the decision making in the fMRI data that I had. So then the developments in the field of artificial intelligence will hopefully help us tackle such issues. So my take on it in a simple, short sentence, it's a very hard job that we really need to have a strong collaborative effort in order to understand.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Coming back to where your interest got started, in the decision making, you started with trying to understand consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, reading about consciousness, one only understands how little we understand about what consciousness really is. Can you please give us like the current, the most up-to-date and state-of-the-art scientific understanding of consciousness? Like, what do we understand today about consciousness? What is consciousness?
Well, probably I could not like give you like a review of what we have, like, because it's as I said, it's collaborative field, a very broad field.
Right.
Everyone has his own understanding apparently of consciousness. That's why we need to come together, kind of, to find a consensus or like an agreement.
Right.
So what we know about it is there are so many theories that try to explain why I would look at it like there are like people who are trying to localize where consciousness is, and there are people who are trying to understand how it is generated and why is the brain is a good candidate for hosting or for generating such a phenomenon. So, I mean, some people go are debating: are we does the brain has anything to do with consciousness, or is it like a radio? I mean, that might be not the best scientific way of saying it, but I mean, some people are still debating that. So what happens is if you take out a chunk of the brain, then you change. So so as we said, consciousness is the experience, right? Mm-hmm. So people who are trying to localize a region in the brain that is responsible for consciousness, they're motivated by this fact that if you take part of the brain, then you lose the consciousness experience changes.
Right.
I think Francis Crick, father of the DNA, worked on consciousness during his last days with Christopher Koch, and they were interested in a region in the brain called the claustrum, which is like between the internal and external capsules. It's like a small region of neurons that they were saying that they are very big, with big neurons in the body wise, with so much with long axonal reach that they could be they could host or be the reason for this experience that we have. So that's one of the theories, that you have one region that fires or is responsible for the consciousness experience. I guess we need to kind of also pay attention to the term that it has not a wakefulness. It's like consciousness, what we are trying to understand is not being awake. So there are prerequisites of consciousness, and there's this consciousness experience. That one of the prerequisites is being awake, being able to attend to something. So and it's like the analogy comes close to the computer structure. Like you have so many, you have the keyboard, you have the power generator, you have the battery, but then you have the software. So probably the closest thing to the consciousness is software. So if you take out one chunk of the brain, then you end up with a different conscious experience. So that motivates the people in the localizing kind of field. One interesting, for example, theory was pioneered by Richard Penrose, who lately took the Nobel Prize in physics, and it's labeled as the orchestrated phenomena, the ORC theory, short. Probably it has a very long name to it also. So what happened? What he argues that in order for the brain to work the way it does, it has to host like a quantum computing process.
Yeah.
And he suggests that the microtubules, because they change, they can be, the quantum thing, like if you go back to the Schrodinger's experience or like experiment, like the cat, Schrodinger's cat, is that the cat could be dead or alive until you look at it. So he was trying to kind of localize or study like why is the brain a good candidate for hosting the conscious experience, but not the liver, for example, or not any other part of the body. So his argument is that the microtubules in the brain, which are like, so in the neuron, you have like different proteins or different structures, and one of them is the microtubules. It's responsible for transforming or like transporting certain proteins between the cellular structures in the axon. So he suggests that those can be in two different positions until the stimulus come in, or like until the conscious experience generates. So that's one of the interesting theories I find personally. I'm always inclined to like explanations from the physicists to try to kind of understand. It's just intriguing. It sounds outlandish enough that might be true at the end of the day. So that might be a small review, but it's a very big topic that I feel humbled like to even be asked about. So
right. But I love the different possibilities that you just presented, the different topics, the different ideas that are being debated. And it's just something, like you said, humbling to just think about that big question of consciousness. But I think it's one of the burning questions of humanity, which we're not going to solve with
the last frontier.
Yeah. I do think of it that way. So, Ahmad, tell me about a little more about the decision-making side. So, for us as humans, when we make decisions, how far does our biology affect, like, is it something when I decide to go left instead of right, is it something that is already is it pre-designed that I will can does my biology determine that I'm gonna go left and not right, or do I have like free will to decide whether I go left or right? Does that make sense? Like, is that something you could answer?
Well, it's also like a very huge issue, like free will. Do we have it? And it's been debated for the last forever. Like if we have, I think neuroscience provides an interesting perspective to it. So it seems that we don't have free will. It seems like that our, like from a mechanistic neuroscientific point of view, that you could even determine if this human being deciding that or this, like seconds even before him or her being aware of their choice or taking it. So there are recordings from the motor cortex that would show that they will probably press the right button even before them knowing that they want to press the right button. So that debates presents some evidence against the fact of free will. but it remains very random. So the decision making or the neuronal process remains very noisy in the brain and random.
Yeah.
So so it's a probability. So you might at the end say, okay, 70% based on the reading that we have, they will press the right or the left. And then the 30% that is remaining, they might change their opinion or their choice. And you could still like record the change that they're forming. There are certain studies that focuses on the change in the choice or the change in the decision. I think, or I would like to think that this noisiness in the brain could still host some hope for free will, because because it might be depressing for certain people to say, okay, that's the way we are wired, and that's the way, and it holds very big ethical implications.
Right.
I think there was if someone's interested, I recommend like a book called Free Will by Sam Harris about the issue. But Sam Harris is a strong advocate, like there's no free will. I don't know. It remains, as I said, like it depends if you're if you're emotionally connected to like having a free will. If that means a lot to you, then I think you should keep on believing that. But at least the neuroscientific understanding suggests that there is a big part of it is how our brains are wired. But the good news is that you can change the way your brain is wired, right? You can form different habits, and then we know through neuroplasticity that if you, for example, try or train yourself to do a different thing, then you might end up forming a different decision.
Yeah.
Like, the probability of forming the decision then might change, I guess.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating that you mentioned that, because that I'm very interested in training the brain, and how you can use different tools such as neurofeedback to strengthen different areas of the brain. And there are actually implications and studies that show, you mentioned the role of the prefrontal cortex and the parietal cortex in decision making as well, and many sorts of other higher cognitive function. And there are studies that very strongly show that through brain training and through mindfulness training itself, you can strengthen those areas. So I am definitely hopeful about the free will aspect. If we have the free will to kind of train our brain pretty much the same way that we train a muscle. There open up a lot of different avenues for us to be able to influence the biology side, rather than saying I was born with a bad brain, the biology, I'm just how I just behave the way my biology makes me behave. So that's the way I like to think about it, and I believe there's a lot of scientific evidence supporting that. And we don't need to even look at big scientific studies. We can even kind of find that in our own lives, just changing a lot of different things, the way we live life, the way we choose to think our thoughts and manage our emotions, can have a lot of impact in the way we function in the world, in the way our, kind of our brain functions. And, there are so many studies that kind of show that change in biology as well. What's your take on that?
I think that like, as I said, if you're strongly a believer in the importance of free will in your life, I mean, good for you. Then you should keep on believing if that makes you function better. I'm like still, I haven't formed like a strong opinion about it. Like, okay, no, but I think yes, neuroplasticity is like through neurofeedback is valid, that you can really kind of train certain wirings in the brain to encourage a certain behavior.
Right.
But if there's some issue in the wiring itself, you might find it harder to acquire certain behavior compared to someone who has a structure that is with a certain readiness to acquire a different behavior, no matter what it is, like good or bad. I'm not saying
Yeah.
so so that might be freeing somehow, okay, if we are able to understand more how the brain is structured, how the neurons talk to each other, and how do we form the habits or the decision, then we might be able to say, okay, yeah, in order to get rid of a certain behavior, then this might be the good region to target with non-invasive, for example, stimulating methods like transcranial magnetic stimulation, and kind of rewire what's happening there to encourage different wiring that will lead to a higher probability of forming a decision that might be better with a better outcome, let's say, at the end of the day.
Right.
So I think that has some value, like the neurofeedback, and our cognitive training in general. My take on cognitive training is that it is domain specific so far. Like if you train on one task, you might get good at this game, but if you go to a different game, you need to retrain. It's like an issue that artificial intelligence researchers also face. The Go game is a great AI for the Go game, but then if you put them for a different, so I guess it has some value. But if we understand more how our brains are connected and how can we reconnect them and form them through medications, through stimulation, through forming habits, through neurofeedback, I think there's something to it. Yeah, for sure.
Right, 100%. So you mentioned giving stimulus from the outside, such as transcranial magnetic stimulation, and I have seen while working in the clinic in neurology and partly in psychiatry, I've seen patients with severe depression, like therapy-resistant depression, go through that kind of session of transcranial magnetic stimulation, and it just kind of their symptoms get better like the next day. And I have seen that myself. Yeah. And, being a clinician, that's my observation and observations of many other colleagues. Like I've had, a discussion on this topic with several colleagues who have experience with that. But you being a researcher who has, I believe you going through some of your work, that you have worked with this, method during your research work. Can you tell me a little bit about the research side?
Sure. I'm surprised that they snapped. In my case, they never like this. I was hoping for the snapping thing to happen, but so what I did, right. So with the Fmri, what you do is you study correlation. As we said, like some activity happens in the brain, and you correlate it with a certain behavior. But in order to know, okay, is this region really involved in what's going on? You really need to influence this region and then see if the output changes, like the behavioral output changes. And you can do that optogenetically. For example, in the mice, you can shed a light on a certain receptor, and then they will open like voltage-gated channels, and you have different behavior. For human beings, you can't do that. You can use like non-invasive. Luckily, you can do that. You can use non-invasive treatments like transcranial magnetic stimulation or TDCS, direct current stimulation, or alternating current stimulation. Different concepts at the physiological level, but the idea is the same. You're trying to change the neuronal firing, and then you hope for a different output. It's great that it's moving to the clinical aspect, especially in psychiatry, and resistant depression. I find I read like reports, and I attended some conferences where they show like impressive results, like clinical studies, properly like randomized clinical studies, and it seems like it has some clinical value, as you said. I never worked with depressed patients or like in the psychiatric field using transcranial magnetic stimulation. I tried to work, or my work was limited on the parietal cortex, not the frontal. Maybe the frontal is because of the anatomical structures, because like anteriorly the brain, maybe like frontally is a little bit, the skull is thinner than posteriorly. That might influence the stimulation, or like the way the region that I was stimulating you can't access. So I didn't have success with this method. So it was a challenging method to use to influence the decision making.
Yeah.
But with apparently with psychiatry, it's gaining attraction and traction also. So.
Yeah, like I just want to add to that, like as with so many different therapy options, it's also the effect it has on the individual is always individual, it's always different because human beings are different. And also, just for the viewers, I just want to say that, you know, for anything that we talk about in this episode, or any methods that we discuss, it's always going to be individual, and you know, anything that you want to try out regarding your depression, anxiety, or whatever it is that you're going through, always you know, work with your physician, your medical doctor, and with your clinician, you know, keeping in mind that these different things are your options, you know, and observations that I have made in the clinic, and Ahmad, you have seen in your research work, they also kind of differ. Like, you haven't had that great results, but I've seen, you know, patients get really well. So, you know, all this have to be taken with a little caveat that, you know, in the clinic, in working with patients, you always see different kinds of results, and people always have, you know, some people will respond to some sort of therapies and others don't. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to add to that.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. That's great to keep in mind for the viewers also.
Right.
Maybe you could tell me more about this, like sessions that you saw with TMS and the depressed individuals or patients. What, like, do you remember like how long was the session, or like the details?
Actually, Ahmad, I have worked clinically in the field of neurology, and the psychiatry observations that I just told you about, those were from different kinds of rotations. So I myself have, I have, you know, seen clinical reports and case studies of patients who were around in our hospital who I know got really well. However, I myself have not administered those, you know, therapies. So this is not, you know, the work that I did. So, yeah.
Yeah, like psychiatry is interesting. It's interesting to say the least, and there are certain new treatment methods, or like they are accepting or experimenting at least with different new treatment modalities, such as TMS or transcranial magnetic stimulation. That's good news for the patients.
Yeah, 100%. So I would like to, you know, at this point ask you about how you think, because you told me while we were discussing different talking points of this conversation, you told me that you're very interested in the role of AI and how that's going to change, you know, patient-oriented medicine in the future. So tell me a little more about your view on this.
So I think like it's promising. It's very promising what's happening with artificial intelligence, like developments, what we're seeing. People do not know, or even like colleagues in the field, like how strong the impact will be. So people are not ready for how developed the AI is already. Like good AI is already here, but it really needs to be adopted very basically by the different sectors. Like let's say like in the healthcare domain.
Yeah.
So you might hear like physicians are afraid of the role. I worked in radiology, and in the radiology is like a big debate. Oh, artificial intelligence might replace radiologists.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my take on that is that the physician who's not like it's not going to take anyone's job. I think at least in the near future. But like good radiologists or good physicians are the ones that are going to understand AI and are going to be the ones who are able to implement AI in their practice. So I think that's like AI will complement our work, will make it hopefully easier. I worked with rudimentary versions of AI in the radiology, so like in the lung field, you can localize the specific changes related, like malignant changes using segmentation algorithms with the AI, and gives you. It's very for the radiologist. I can see why it's not attractive because it takes you out from the reading process and you have to focus on it. It does not run parallel in easy, seamless, like seamless way, but you really need to focus on that and then go back. So it's still not like practice ready.
Right. Right. It's
But it
not.
will get there faster than we expect.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so I think it's exciting what's happening. Deep learning in specific, like the algorithms in deep learning, they are able to get better. So might be interesting future for medicine. I don't see that like universities are changing their curriculum to include AI. I think that's something they need to work on. I hope that AI would be able to like free some time, like of the physician time, to spend this time with the patient. So it will decrease the amount of work that is patient irrelevant.
Yeah.
And it will bring back like the patient at the center of the healthcare process, like patient-oriented medicine. So the patient will probably be wearing gadgets that, for example, it's already happening that it sends like ECG or electrocardiogram reports to the cardiologist. They can, okay, say maybe and please visit us. There's something going on. We might check you up, or the cardiologist will call the patient and tell him, okay, now please, what are you doing? Like, let's have a visit. Let's have a talk. There is something not going well with your report. Those reports will be generated by the AI itself, and like so you like the patient. I expect the patient will have some like insights in their health, and they can take actions by themselves. And the medical doctor will be informed and have the right time to intervene when it is needed.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's hope for the best, I guess. I mean, but we need to be ready for the change, definitely, what's going on. Like,
Right. What's your vision for the future? Do you think this changes, and where do you see these changes coming from? Is it gonna be hospitals, state-funded hospitals that, come up with these new technologies, or is it going to be, do you already see companies coming up with such innovative projects?
all right, that's a very good question. Where does innovation start? I think right now, like probably it's companies, startups. I don't see like state-funded universities like leading the innovative process. So probably like individuals with an interest and right background.
Yeah.
What do you think? Where's what do you think? Who's going to lead the innovative process for AI development in the healthcare sector?
Well, I find it very interesting because I recently read about Chancellor Merkel talking about digitalizing health and all that stuff. So, but as with many things, we see these things take a lot of time because from what I've seen working in hospitals, big hospitals here in Germany, things take a really long time to change because systems get very comfortable with the way things have been for generations, and it's very, you have, so many factors that are dependent on that, industries and jobs, and to bring about that change, that shift, the change goes deeper than most of us think. So it's not easy as well. So I do agree with you that companies, startups, innovators, people with that kind of background will come up with innovative, technologies, and we will see those more and more being implemented. But I also do kind of agree with you that the technologies will come from private sectors and companies and innovators, interested in those fields. That's also my observation.
You.
Yeah. So I wanna at this point would love to jump on the other topic that we discussed, because you yourself are very interested in further education in academics in the medical field. You yourself being a medical doctor and a scientific researcher, you have written a book on the topic of how medical doctors can get the German medical license, people coming from different countries for foreign medical doctors. So I think that's an interesting topic for many people, because I get asked this a lot. I'm a foreign medical graduate. How can I come and work in Germany? So tell me a little more about this.
Yeah, sure. That's a very interesting topic indeed. So I am an international medical graduate. I studied medicine in my home country, Jordan. So, and then I wanted to continue with, like at the beginning, I wanted to start my residency. Like, where should I do my residency next? Should I do it home? Should I do it in the US or Germany or England? So at that point, I was like around 2010. And like so the US path with the US MLEs was like the common path, let's say, for my colleagues, because we study medicine in English. So that was like the straightforward. Okay, you study in English, you do the steps, or you do for England. There's the PLAB B, PLAB
Yeah, right.
exam. So and I want to. And from a financial reasons, like if you want to do the US MLEs, you really need to have financial cushion that you can, like the exams are expensive, and even the interviews there, like you need to fly to the US and do step 1, step 2, and so on. So that was not an option for me. I did not want to burden my family with any financial expenses.
Yeah.
So Germany sounded at first more. It's closer to Jordan, can travel easier there, and it would cost less to learn the language, and that was the very important prerequisite for going to Germany. So from a financial, aspect that made more sense for me, but also I was interested in learning a new language. So that was also
Oh,
like,
wow.
like, yeah, why not? And I mean, you end up with a new language. If you never made it to Germany, at least you have the language. So, but I ended up applying to the research, the Max Planck Institute, and I got accepted. And the academic world, master's, PhD, and afterwards, my goal was always go back to the clinics, apply what I learned in the academia to like the patients. At that point, I needed to do the equivalence exams, so. And as a foreigner in Germany, or like an international medical student, you need to have 2 exams. Like one for the language skills, medical language skills, the Fachsprachprüfung, and the second one is the Kenntnisseprüfung, which I call the German medical license exam, in order to kind of make it like that we can compare it to the other examinations like the USMLE. So but when I finished my Kenntnisseprüfung, or like this medical examination skills, I looked back at my like experience, and I wanted to share it with others, because there was a huge deficit in the information, the quality of information given to the international graduates, medical graduates. So I sat down, kind of like focused. I wrote a concise book called Erste Hilfe for the German medical license exam. Like the motivation was to talk to myself like 10 years ago. If someone would give me a guideline, like, okay, how can you prepare properly for the exam? So like, I wouldn't like waste time. So I wasted a lot of time because of not knowing, because I didn't master the language, basically due to the lack of resources in English, and mostly are in German. So, so this book, what I do is I provide like kind of a plan for someone who's interested in pursuing a medical like specialty in Germany. And this plan takes you from years to the day of your examination. Like, what do you need to do years ahead for coming to Germany? And then until the day of the exam, what would you expect? At least until, this is like, I wrote it in 2019. So nothing changed until from 2019 to.
That's great to know.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is to define a clear goal. Like any international medical graduate should have a clear goal. If it's Germany, if they decide it's Germany, then they should stick to that and focus, and then pursue it with 100%. Like, just pursue it until they get there. And like, I provide some arguments in the book, like what are the pros and cons for medical specialty in Germany. So I argue that for you to define, I try to help the reader to define their goal in regards of Germany. I think it's like, why would someone come to Germany, for example? That would be the question. And for me, it was, okay, it is a strong healthcare system. It is respected. Like, if I get the degree as a medical specialist from Germany, it will be respected all over the world. One of the very attractive things was that you could really choose what specialty you want. This is like a freedom you don't get in the USMLEs. Like, if your language is really good, you can choose that. Like, I wanted to be in neuroradiology, specialty, and I managed to get into the Heidelberg University, for example, a very competitive position. So just apply, and you might end up like landing your specialty, the dream specialty, kind of. So that was very attractive for me in comparison to like USA, where you need to do the steps, and based on your marks, then you are allowed to apply for certain things, but not allowed to others.
Right.
And during the residency, you're well compensated. So like the payment is not that bad, like in comparison to Germany. And I think like once you finish the residency, you can get you can apply for a permanent residency, like permanent like residency in Germany, like the passport basically, and that might be something that is attractive because it opens doors for us in the world. Like it's a very respected passport. But the cons of coming to Germany and like why not was the language. It's like you need to focus on the language aspect and the medical training. And it's sad to say, but you will probably be like judged. Your competency will be judged based on the language, but not on the medical skills that you have. So that is a very, I think it's like something people need to keep it in mind. Like if your language, you will always be considered that, okay, just because of your language skills or your accent. And one thing that is not very attractive is that there are 16 states in Germany, and the system is not centralized. So you might end up in a good state where like they allow and they will, it's easier, the process of like the equivalency process is easier compared to the other states. So it depends. It's a matter of luck. It ends up and even the cost of the exam might vary from one state to another. Like I paid 800 euros for my exam. Others didn't even need to do this exam. So I think that is something to keep in mind. And the quality of training, that brings us to the quality of training, varies also, like from university hospitals. So there are the university hospitals, there are academic hospitals affiliated with the universities, there are private hospitals, and there are then like communal hospitals, which are governmental hospitals basically. And the best are university hospitals, but it's very competitive to get into those hospitals.
Would you say they're the best? In terms of the quality of the training that you get, would you say they're the best?
At least they try to follow evidence-based medicine. So, and there's research in them. But like the clinical aspect, I think is not the best. Like I didn't have a good experience. Like my experience was clinically is not. But they followed evidence-based. They try to implement evidence, but it's very, very stressful. It's a stressful environment for international graduates to be in. I recommend in my book, like I recommend that people start first with the hospitation in a rural like hospital. And then move slowly the ladder. At least do 1 year or 2 years, like in a university hospital. They get like once their language is good enough that no one takes advantage of them, or put them in situations that they don't want to be. So that's and then if so, then it's kind of like it's good on your resume also, like that you worked at a university.
It's good on the resume. I do want to add something there though. So what, in my experience, because I have done my Ph.D, which is the final year of the medical, your MD, in a university hospital in neurology in Munich. So what I've seen is during the residency training, what you do is you get to spend a lot of time doing the same thing over and over again, because the teams are usually so big that it's harder to get your hands on different kinds of patients and different kinds of cases. So the exposure to different kinds of, diseases is much less. Although university hospitals would usually do state-of-the-art, procedures that you don't have anywhere else, maybe in the country. They would have those techniques and those diagnostics and everything. However, being a young doctor, early in your residency, you're probably not going to get exposed to any of that. You're probably going to be just sitting in your, sitting in your cubicle and doing the same thing over and over for a couple of years, and it can get really, I've seen people who are very frustrated, like spending years in the same position. What I have also experienced, because I started out my clinical career as a doctor in a slightly smaller hospital, and I, like 3 weeks into my residency, I was allowed to do like night shifts, 24-hour shifts all by myself. So you can imagine like the kind of exposure that you get to different kinds of patients. You're allowed to do everything with supervision from senior doctors, but you get exposed to many different kinds of diseases, many different kinds of cases, and the amount of responsibility that you're allowed to take is early on much bigger. So if you're someone who is willing to really jump into it and learn everything as fast as you want to, that's definitely a good option, I think. So that's in my experience what I've seen.
Right. I think it's variable. It's really variable where you land. It really depends on where you start or where you are, where you work, and that's
right.
It's probably the case everywhere in the world. Depends where you work at, but it's one thing that you need to keep in mind once you choose where you want to continue with your specialty or residency. Definitely, it affects the cases, as you said, that you're exposed to, or like the level of evidence-based medicine, also that, or the training, the amount of training you get. Totally, I agree. Right.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add to that?
Right. I think the biggest issue that I have in my notes is the language. I can't emphasize enough how much the language is important in Germany. That's why in my plan I propose they spend even 2 years on the German language before coming to Germany, and reach a C1 level or C1 level in the language, and take their time perfecting their language as far as they could in their home countries before. And once their language is good enough, then contact the embassy and ask, okay, what are the requirements for me in German? All like that really leaves a bigger and a better impact on your interactions, and it makes your life much easier. So
right.
the sooner they start with the language, the better, and higher they reach the language level. So I came to German with a B2 level, but it was very hard, and I worked 5 years as a researcher, and when I started in the clinics, it was very challenging. I guess you studied medicine from the beginning, and you had to do some language even before that, right?
Right. So my story, very in shortly. I did my high school and international high school diploma in my home country in Bangladesh, and then I decided to study medicine. And pretty much like you, I considered I wanted to study medicine abroad, so I considered different countries. And Germany was an option for me, also because first of all, it's a very well recognized medical degree. I already knew some German. I had German language as part of my school curriculum, so I already knew some German, and that's why it was an option for me. And it kind of opens up different doors for you, because not all international students consider this an option due to the language barriers. So because of that, I was able to secure a place in a very, very good university like the University of Goettingen, which is one of the excellence cluster universities, one of the top universities for medicine in Germany. And having that place was a big step in my journey, because having that place gave me more confidence to move to an entirely different country and pursue that medical career in a different language than I was brought up with. However, I do want to talk about a few challenges, because if you're so in my batch, there were, like, if I remember it correctly, there were like 12 international students and that was a batch of like 300 students. And you can imagine 12 of them coming from other countries. And it's a very challenging and a very competitive situation, because you have all these native students who are gonna come from, they're the top of their class, right? It's a very competitive process of getting selected for a medical school, one of the top in the country, and you can imagine they being the top of their class from schools all over the country. And all the lectures being in German, all your courses being in German. The language itself, even if you have learned German as a second language at school, you are by far not close to the native language level. But that comes with time. So for anyone thinking about pursuing that path that I have taken, it's important to keep in mind you need to keep a very high tolerance level of frustration, because you can't expect to learn the language and be really at the top of your game at everything, which you may be used to if you're coming from being the top of your class and all those things. So there it can get a little bit frustrating, but like with everything else, if you keep an open mind, you learn with time. And the course itself was a really good one. So if you're interested in what you're learning, you will eventually get there. So that's my experience.
Oh, that's great. That's great experience. And do you think like there was did you guys had like VR or new technologies? Like, did you come across like new technologies used for your training or as a medical student, or was it old school?
Yeah, we did have quite a few simulation classes, especially in anesthesiology, where we got to dummy patients, and you could intubate dummy patients and that kind of stuff. However, not throughout the entire course, like not as much as I would have liked, or as much as maybe will come in the future. But there was, to a certain extent, simulations, that kind of stuff.
I remember like at least last period of time they had introduced like an anatomical like interactive screen that was in the library. I remember like you go and you book it or something, and they were happy about it. I don't know. I never tried it, but maybe you did. I don't know.
We didn't have that back then.
No? Okay.
Yeah, in Goettingen, everything good happened after I was finished.
Apparently. No. Yeah. Göttingen. Great Göttingen.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun, having this conversation with you, because you and I both got to experience Göttingen in a time when it was, a couple of years ago. So it's nice to remember and talk about it. Definitely.
Right. I like it. I like Göttingen. It's a small, nice, calm at the time city. I don't know what happened right now, but it was good. I have still many friends in Göttingen, and I keep in touch with them, and they're really good people. And yeah.
Amazing. So, Ahmad, tell me, what are your plans and dreams for the future?
Peace. Live in peace. Peace for the universe. So personally, right now I moved to freelance medical writing. That is like since July 2020. So I worked during the first pandemic wave in a lung center as a radiologist, and then I noticed that we need to focus on educating not only the public but also like the medical personnel about what's going on. So I moved to freelance medical writing. Medical writing is great industry. People don't know much about it. It's like like for example the clinical studies that are now in the media about vaccines, that those studies are written and edited by professionals that are called medical writers. So there are regulatory medical writers, and then there are the medical communication. I kind of see myself in the medical communication field. So we prepare documents for the public related to diseases, medications, or publications, peer-reviewed articles. I enjoy like going in depth into literature and write a literature review. I even have an interest in data science, so I can do like some analysis and like conclusions from the evidence-based conclusions, and support decision making, like business decision making. So that's the direction I'm moving to. It's a pretty like challenging, because as if you're starting your own business, you probably you're facing also probably similar challenges, like getting your clients, first client, and then getting the validation in the field. So I'm learning. That's the exciting part of it, like learning meeting a new people. I'm engaging more with my network, like putting more effort on like social media related, like LinkedIn. I have my own website, so I'm enjoying it so far.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That was very valuable. I really appreciate everything, that you brought to this discussion. I really enjoyed the conversation, especially the part with the consciousness, and then how we, the transition to the different career aspects in pursuing, specialty in medicine in Germany. I think that's going to be valuable to a lot of people. So at this point, I really want to thank you, Ahmed, for this wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabea. I had so much fun. Very intriguing questions. I feel humbled again to answer some of them, or to be given the chance even to express my opinion about some of them. They are very big topics. Big thanks for approaching, and I hope you find success with this podcast. Very informative. And yeah, let's see. Let's hope people enjoy it.
Thank you, Ahmed. Take care.
Yeah.